Hurricane Sandy, also referred to as Superstorm Sandy, was a tropical cyclone that took place in the end of October this year. In diameter, it was the largest Atlantic hurricane on record. In early calculations, Sandy was estimated to have caused damage of at least $50 billion and around 200 deaths, but the numbers are still increasing. Sandy severely affected portions of the Caribbean and Bermuda initially from 22nd to 27th of October. As a preparation, tropical storm watches and warnings had been announced in these regions before the hurricane struck. These were issued reflecting the enormous size of the storm and the wide-reaching impact. Jamaica suffered from heavy winds and flooding which destroyed many houses and left around 70% of people without power. Haiti was still recovering from the 2010 earthquake, the Hurricane Isaac and the ongoing cholera outbreak, and was struck by another disaster, leaving flooded streets by heavy rains, many homeless, and resulting in another issue, which is lack of food in the state. Major damages left in Cuba were also destroyed houses, flooding, and knocked out electricity and water services. On the 29th of October, Hurricane Sandy started making approach towards the U.S. coast. More specifically moved towards mid-Atlantic and northeastern United States and later on to Canada. Over 20 states in the U.S. were affected. The hurricane caused billions of dollars of damage. Due to flooding and other related problems, airlines canceled a total of 19,700 flights according to FlightAware. Around 4.8 million people remained without power in 15 states, mostly in New Jersey, New York, and Pennsylvania. Extensive damage was left in New York City, flooding numerous streets, tunnels, and subway lines in Lower Manhattan and other areas of the city, and cutting off electricity in many parts of the city and suburbs. The supply of fuel was cut off and some petrol stations stopped working. Public schools were closed and the New York Stock Exchange shut down trading for 2 days, which was the first 2-day weather closure since the Great Blizzard in 1888. Mayor of New York City announced cancellation of the yearly New York City Marathon, which was to take place on 4th of October. All this just part of exhaustive list that was caused by the Hurricane Sandy, which is the costliest disaster in the U.S. history. This short video will continue studying the disaster effects from different international relations theories perspectives.
Jamaica in a great way. When Sandy reached the United States, it was considered only a Category 1 hurricane, although it had been a Category 2 hurricane while passing Cuba and Haiti. The primary focus of the media coverage was definitely on the United States and the possible influence of Sandy in the upcoming US elections. This reflects the belief of realists that states with more power also will get more attention in the international arena. Although the United States had the highest death toll, with 121 people being killed because of Sandy, the media mostly ignored the 70 deaths in the Caribbean. Days after the hurricane had struck Haiti, it called for international help several times, because the situation there was and still is very grave, with more than 70% of destroyed crops in some areas. Despite its appeals, it has received very little help so far, and only a few countries have offered money, food, or help for rebuilding. The absence of help can be explained by the lack of interest the world powers such as the United States, China, or Russia have in this area. Haiti is a poor country that doesn't have many valuable resources, and following the realist theory, other states do not have a strong interest to help this country. So far, Cuba has received more aid, all of it coming from its allies Russia, Venezuela, and Bolivia. This shows how important relations with other nations can be, especially in these kinds of unforeseeable events. The aforementioned countries have an interest to keep the Cuban government as strong as possible, because they have the same kind of socialist government. If social unrest starts in Cuba following Sandy, these unrests could also start in Venezuela or Bolivia, maybe following the example of the Arab Spring. Although the United States suffered the most deaths and by far the biggest damage, they have not asked for any help and actually turned down some offers, for example, from the Iranian Red Crescent. The US government tries to portray a strong United States that can help itself and does not need to rely on other nations. To conclude the analysis from the realist perspective, disaster relief can depend heavily on the interests of other nations, and most of the time is not only for charitable reasons.
While the previous
Now we will
explains
continue
the
with the green
event from
theory.
realist perspective, the green theory highlights different aspects about this environmental crisis. The main theme that the green theorists see in this event is the problems arising from climate change and global warming. The number of natural disasters has been rapidly increasing in the past decades, and only few can deny that this is not because of climate change, and especially the climate change that is caused by human actions. The green theorists further argue that the states in the international system have been acting selfishly in addressing issues related to climate change. They especially criticize the states' desire for power and need to dominate others. The struggle between nations demonstrates how everything else, including the environment, is inferior to the struggle for power and security in the international system. It demonstrates how states are willing to do anything to remain relevant on the world map. Also, the green theorists emphasize the problems that capitalism and financial inequality pose to the environment. The capitalist atmosphere that requires high profits and economic success at any cost often results in the neglecting of the environmental concerns. From the green theory perspective, there is an escalating tension between the rich and the poor nations. This is especially problematic when considering the efforts needed to respond to climate change, as the less developed countries are not as capable to take responsive actions without help from the developed countries. To conclude, from the green theory view, the Hurricane Sandy can be seen as a result of the ignorance of the states and humans toward the climate change and the
Until now,
environmental
we
issues
have
in
analyzed
general.
Sandy's problem from many points of view, but let us take a look from the constructivist perspective. Sandy, also called Frankenstorm, is considered the second most destructive tropical storm, just below Hurricane Katrina. However, Sandy affected far more countries than Katrina did. The devastation is estimated in more than $50 billion just in the New York State. Nevertheless, the hurricane affected not just the United States, but also countries like Venezuela, Haiti, Jamaica, and Cuba, among other countries of the Caribbean. The impact of Sandy is undeniable. However, the response of the governments in all these countries will have a major influence on the social effects the hurricane can have over the population. Being the government the institution in charge of bringing security and protection to its society, the lack or fulfill of these obligations will influence directly in the force, credibility, and legitimacy that it has within its population. Let us not forget that all institutions exist just because of the validity people give them. Any institution without a social acceptance is just a building with people carrying on non-important activities. Many theories and theorists make the mistake of taking as a fact the institution's power, without considering that the same power is just possible thanks to the approval that the community grant them. We cannot deny the existence and the influence that brute facts have, taking as an example the occurrence of the Frankenstorm. However, at the end, are the social interpretations and meanings that people have on the brute facts the ones that give them validity, including the institutions, the government, and the state itself? The brute facts are just valid in the way people give them acceptance and importance. Thank you.
Sandy, one of the largest hurricanes that has ever been witnessed in the Atlantic, left behind a great deal of destruction and lives lost. The costs that can be counted as a result of the hurricane are over 50 billion and still rising. The different IR theories portray different points of view of this environmental catastrophe. The realist perspective focuses on the magnitude in the interest of power, on how states are either affected by Sandy or are capable of helping others. The green theory attacks the ignorance of the states and individuals in addressing environmental concerns. The green theorists argue that the struggle for power among states make other factors such as environment not significant, and therefore not relevant. From a constructivist perspective, it is important to mention the impact Sandy can have on the acceptance of the local governments, because people could start to doubt the abilities of those that are currently in power. Hurricane Sandy did not only have an interpretation as a natural disaster that had a global impact, it also demonstrates the interest of international relations theories to try to decipher the world.